all of my live streams. Charles Moscowitz, Michael D. Shaw is my guest. And Mike, I wanted to start by talking a little bit about the Republican platform.
I've got it right here in my hot little hand.
Excellent. In the lead up to it, people like Mark Elias and all of the conspirators were pointing fingers at Trump and saying that he's secretly endorsing this Heritage Foundation platform, which has some things in it that really are not mainstream, and trying to make this accusation. And I think Trump put that to sleep when he endorsed the Republican National Committee platform that was devised by the Republican National Committee, headed up or co-chaired by Laura Trump, his daughter-in-law, who's been incredible. And I think that I'm just waiting to hear any of them challenge this, because
I was surprised because this thing came out a number of days ago, and I didn't see a lot of reaction to it. In fact, they were trying to keep pushing this Project 2025,
right?
Because if you look at this thing, there's really not a whole lot to disagree with in it.
Well, they're pretending it doesn't exist because it's a complete victory for Trump and for the MAGA movement, and it resonates very well. The other thing we need to remember about Trump is that in his first term in office, Trump was one of the few presidents in modern times, Democrat or Republican, who actually used and honored the party platform. The rest of them, they just look at that as a lot of flourish, for the convention, then they toss it away. But Trump kept it on his desk, and he tried to fulfill it. He used it as a guide. And so this is very pivotal in terms of what we can expect from the second, maybe you may say third, Trump administration. Let's be careful. I'm running on YouTube today, so so we can't go there. But I'm not going to worry too much about it. I want to go over some of the particulars. All right.
Please.
Now this is the first number one item on the list is seal the border and stop the migrant invasion. Okay. Now
not to be a smartass. That's actually the second item. But go ahead.
Oh, it is. What's the first item?
The first item is defeat inflation and quickly bring down all prices.
Oh, okay. I'm looking at a list from the Gateway Pundit.
Yeah, this one. Okay, if you print it out, but I'm sorry to interrupt. That was silly.
Not at all. You're probably looking at the actual list.
Yeah. Right.
This is the one thing that the media is mentioning because they think it's going to hurt Trump. They're talking about the possibility that there might be a massive deportation when Trump takes office. Now, first of all, I don't think most Americans are opposed to that. But even if they were, I mean, it's not really, I think that the bottom line is that Trump is going to take steps immediately to deport and make it easy to deport people who are involved in crime.
Well, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Because if you're going to have a deportation policy, and I'll use my favorite example of the Recording Industry Association of America, you're going to go after people with no sympathy. All right.
Right.
When RIAA tried to clamp down on so-called illegal music downloads, the thing that absolutely killed them was they went after some kid who was living in Spanish Harlem in New York.
Mm-hmm.
His family had very low income, and it was absurd. All right. Now, had they gone after someone that was, egregiously taking these things, reselling them or whatever. So I think it's very important, as you say, you're going to start the deportations with the criminals.
That's right. They're going to try to make it look like he's ripping a baby from its mother's breast. They're just going to make it look like a horror show, when in fact they're going to start by making it easier for the court system to quickly deport criminals.
Yeah.
and also to deport all of these single men who are here on some kind of a welfare program. Many of them are from the Middle East or from Africa, and who are not connected to families. And you have huge numbers of them being kept in hotels. Even here in Massachusetts, the governor, the very ultra liberal governor of our state, Maura Healey, is putting some brakes on it because it's not sustainable, and they can be very easily deported without too much fuss. I mean, they're all being kept at a huge cost per day for the taxpayer. And I don't think that most Americans are going to have a lot of sympathy for them. They in Massachusetts, they got a food allowance. They signed a contract with this fancy Italian caterer to give them incredible food. That's like, I mean, $15 for breakfast, 15 for lunch, and 30 for dinner, 5 days a week, 7 days a week, and it's costing like millions of dollars. And they are, that's better than most working families get per day. Better
Well, what
than
did
I
it take to get Maura Healey off the left wing, at least on this issue? I mean, what did she say? Because
Well,
she's
what
a
she's realizing is that the state doesn't, we don't have a Federal Reserve in Massachusetts that can
yeah,
print money,
yeah.
and that the state has to adhere by law to a budget, and that the budget is going to break at a certain time unless the federal government coughs up more money. And the federal government, I think, is becoming tapped out. So it's just a practical matter. She may be ultra liberal, but she's also tends to be very pro business. And there's a lot of hue and cry about the effect on the whole infrastructure of the state, and I just think that it's proving to be too much for her. In the city of New York, they're straining under the phenomena of the mayor giving debit cards that
Yeah.
automatically replenish every month. I mean, it's costing the city of New York, I don't know how many. I think it's already up to $500 million
Well,
since the program
under
started.
what authority does the mayor unilaterally have the ability to spend that kind of money?
Well, I
I
mean,
don't think the city council of New York voted for that.
that's a good question. I mean, we'd have to delve into how they do this, but it is public funds. It's not,
Yeah.
you don't get these big, fat liberal foundations that have trillions of dollars coughing up any dough to do this, even though they might advocate for it. I don't think that Catholic Charities or SIAS or any of these other groups that have been pushing for open borders and helping illegal aliens, they're well funded. They're not coughing up the money. It's the public. It's the you and I, John and Jane Q. Schmuck taxpayer that's footing this bill. Okay, number two, carry out the well. This is the hot one.
Yeah.
Carry out the largest deportation operation in American history. That's the one that's making the headlines. That's the one that Lester Holt is talking about. Again, they think that the American people are going to shudder with horror over the thought. I don't think so. First
Now,
of all, it's going to be very carefully done. It's not going to be, the way they portray it. Number three, end inflation and make America affordable again.
right.
That resonates with average Americans. $15 to buy a McDonald's hamburger for if you have a family of three and a husband and wife, that's $75 to go to McDonald's. The liberals and people like Ruth Ben Gate and others I debate on Twitter. Oh, the economy is so wonderful. Why don't people realize this? The stock market is soaring. Because they don't understand what it's like to be a working schmuck in this country, where you have to pay.
Market is one thing, kitchen table issues are another.
That's right. So I think that one is in Trump's favor.
Yeah.
Let's see. Make America the dominant energy producer in the world by far. Again, they're not going to talk about that because they know that Biden, acting like a dictator for a day, the first day in office, shut down the MX pipeline. He stopped, he basically put high regulation on oil producers and gas producers under the guise that this is supposed to improve the environment. First of all, it doesn't, because then they buy the oil from countries that create it in a more dirty way, and
Yeah.
that pollutes the atmosphere, which affects the whole world. It's not, atmosphere. If they're worried about air pollution, that doesn't have borders. And the whole policy is absurd from an environmental standpoint. Whereas when Trump was president, the atmosphere, the march of carbon emissions went down, and there's, to produce oil effectively is not going to be a polluter. And so their whole argument is ridiculous. And by producing domestic oil and gas, we're going to reduce the cost of energy, and that's going to be affected in the gas pump and in trucking and in everything.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. And they haven't gone into specifics. There was a USA Today editorial. I don't remember who wrote it. It doesn't matter. One of their stock liberals. And they mocked this energy independence concept, but only mocked it. Gave no examples, no specifics, no nothing. The prevailing green philosophy, unfortunately, is we should get rid of all that, presumably so we can live in caves and save Mother Earth, and somehow there won't be any pollution from roasting our saber-toothed tiger over an open fire or whatever it is. So the more they mock this stuff, the more it's going to poorly reflect on them.
Oh yeah, I mean, and a lot of the policies that they're promoting that are supposed to be so environmentally friendly are not. I mean, the pushing of battery-powered cars, they're not talking about what happens to the batteries when they're over. I mean, you want to talk environmental disaster. I mean, that really would be, that is a major problem. It's like, you don't talk about what happens to nuclear waste. It's like these things are just, they push it, and then there's no discussion about the effects. So, I don't think that that's going to augur well for them. Then we have, let's see, stop outsourcing and turn the United States into a manufacturing superpower. Nothing wrong with that. I mean,
I'm not sure how they're going to argue against that unless they try the environmental argument that presumably it's better for China to produce all the air pollution because somehow that doesn't affect the world.
Well,
so
that's
the more they go down that road, the worse it's going to be for them. I think this was very carefully written.
Oh,
good. I have a fan.
It's brilliant. Stop, let's see, large tax cuts for workers and no taxes on tips. I mean, hallelujah, right? I mean, Trump did it last time. Reagan did it. It stimulated the economy. What it did was allow more capital to reside at the point of production, which basically means that you have capital either going into investments, which improves the economy, or people spend it on consumer goods, which improves the economy. Instead of sucking it out of working people and then filtering a few crumbs down after they take the share and put it in their pockets. So I think that that's a winner. Yeah. Defend our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, and our fundamental freedoms, including freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and the right to keep and bear arms. Hallelujah. Those sound like words, but that means something.
Let him argue against that.
I mean, all 10 of the Bill of Rights are under siege today. And to my way of thinking, that's something that everybody, any sane person, would get behind. Prevent World War III, restore peace in Europe and the Middle East, build a great Iron Dome missile shield over our entire country, all made in America. Great, right? I mean, first of all, that'll stimulate the economy because that's manufacturing. Secondly, I mean, that was Trump's policy as president, a strong America that can defend both coasts and disengagement from perpetual wars around the world. it was one of the few administrations, I think the only since Coolidge, where the United States was not engaged in foreign wars. What's Putin did not invade Ukraine. I mean, people, oh, Trump's a puppet of Putin. Really? Then why did Putin grab Crimea under Obama, who basically gave him blankets? And then after Trump left office, why did they launch a full-scale invasion of Ukraine? Right?
I guess for the same reason that the mayor of Chicago said that the violence over the past weekend was the fault of Richard Nixon.
Oh, that's a good one. That thing
No,
is
no, that was it. Yeah, it was amazing.
yes.
And then we found out the last Republican mayor in Chicago apparently was in 1929, I think.
Oh my God. Yeah, right. Nothing like bringing up good old Richard Milhouse Nixon, right? Somehow, what do they think? People are still enraged? I mean, really? I mean, anyway.
I guess. I mean, that Alger Hiss thing is just going to live on forever.
Speaking of Nixon, I noticed that the short list of possible Democratic presidential candidates that once Biden is overthrown includes Al Gore.
Al Gore?
Yes. Al Gore's name has been floated. Why don't they bring back Jimmy Carter? Anyway.
I guess Al Landon wasn't available.
All right. Let's see. End the weaponization of government against the American people. Yes, I think most Americans now know that that's exactly the main thing that this administration has done. Put people in prison who are who are dissenters, whether it be people who are on the lawn of the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, or whether it be Steve Bannon and Peter Navarro, government employees.
Well, how do you justify putting Bannon and Navarro into jail when Eric Holder, nothing happened to him, and he wasn't.
Not to mention Merrick Garland.
Yeah.
They did the exact same thing. They defied Congress, a congressional subpoena. Hillary Clinton, she answered a congressional subpoena by destroying 30,000 emails. Remember, with the bleach bit and the hammers? Nothing. So yes, this is a weaponization of our Department of Justice and a use of it against their political opponents. I think it's now been shown also that the number 3 man at the Department of Justice, Matthew Colangelo, or whatever his name is, Matthew Colangelo, was masterminding, working very closely with Letitia James and with Alvin Bragg and with Big Fanny over in Fulton County. There's an
well, they hit those out of the park, didn't they?
Yeah, but the point is that that's a weaponization, because those are, even if those cases had any merit, which they don't, even so, those are state and local issues. You don't have a Department of Justice sending down the number 3 man to take over the attack in Manhattan. That's weaponization. That's what they do in third world countries. That's what Stalin did when he Berenti Beria, the head of the Secret Service, show me the man and I'll find you the crime. This is the kind of stuff that it hasn't flown well for them, and it's backfired, and Americans are sick of it. It's dangerous. Okay, stop the migrant crime epidemic, demolish the foreign drug cartels, crush gang violence, and lock up violent offenders. Here. I mean, look at how well it worked for Bukele in El Salvador. He became president in a country that had the highest murder rate in the Western Hemisphere. Now it has the lowest, because he built a supermax prison and he beefed up the army, and they went out and they took them all in.
Yeah, well, and of course the other thing going for him was very much the 80-20 principle, right? All the murders were committed by those gangs. They knew who the gangs were, so okay, go forward.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I think people would get behind. Let's see. Rebuild our cities, including Washington, D.C., making them safe, clean, and beautiful again. Great infrastructure. Like Obama talked about infrastructure. He didn't do diddly squat,
Talked
right? I
about it.
mean,
Talked
you
about
know,
it.
Trump actually cares about that as a builder, as a developer. He wants to have improved airports and ports and buildings. That's something that I think Trump, he'd get behind that one. And again, creates jobs. FDR did it and did it well, by the way. I mean, here in Massachusetts, FDR, under the FDR administration, they built the Cape Cod Canal and they built two bridges over it in a matter of 3 years. Today, they couldn't get that done in 20 years at best. So yes, that's great. Strengthen and modernize our military, making it without question the strongest and most powerful in the world. Maybe they could start by getting rid of some of the guys with skirts. I don't want to go into that, but the point is that they're focusing on stuff that's weakening us and is making us the laughing stock of countries like
The
China.
whole DEI that came into the military really just a few years ago. And there's been hearings on this, you see on YouTube, that are almost unbelievable. Apparently, regarding the Air Force Academy, you're not supposed to use the word mom and dad because that might offend people that don't have a conventional mom and dad. So,
right. That aren't a mom, it's like there's no such thing as women now.
yeah.
Right. I mean, that's that whole thing with Ketanji Jackson. Even her recent decision, by the way, her dissent, she wouldn't use the word woman. She said persons, pregnant persons. Which kind of person? Anyway, yeah, I mean, back in the day when MASH was on television, great TV show, you had Corporal Klinger in a dress. It was a cause of comedy. He was trying to get out of the army. But
Right.
now that's something that's not only standard, but you're not allowed to criticize. All right, let's go on to the next one. Keep the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. That is a big issue that people don't really realize because the BRICS nations are growing in number and in power. They say that in the next several years, there's going to be about 30 of them. And they want to replace the US currency as the reserve dollar for the world. That's going to have a huge negative impact on the value of our dollar and on the American economy. The dollar since World War II and Bretton Woods Convention, the US dollar has been the standard of the world. And it's lost such ground because of trillions of dollars spent by this regime in Washington and previous regimes, but this one in
Yeah.
particular, that now it's shaky. I mean, it's not a reliable mode of exchange. You can't depend on it to retain at least a reasonably constant set of value. So, to the idea of strengthening it by doing things like balancing the budget, reducing graft, and all of these crazy expenditures. That's something that is basic. I mean, if we want to survive as a culture, I mean, one of the reasons Rome collapsed was because you had corrupt emperors starting to cut the money. They were clipping the currency and creating two coins out of one. In other words, they were inflating their currency. So that's needed. Let's see. Fight for and protect Social Security and Medicare with no cuts, including no changes to the retirement age. That's an old lie that the liberals like to push, going all the way back to Eisenhower. The Republicans are going to take away Social Security. Social Security, for those listening, that's your money. You put that money into that system every time you get a paycheck. They take money out of your paycheck, and that's your money. That's an annuity, basically. And the only people that have threatened to cut it are the liberal Democrats. They want to means test it. They want to raise the retirement age. I argued this issue when I ran for Congress with Barney Frank. I accused him to his face because we discussed Social Security. If you're single and you pass away, the money disappears. It's not a good system, but the point is it's the system we have, and as such, we have to preserve it and not use it for fraudulent purposes, like putting people on it who haven't paid into it and who then start collecting, like maybe, for example, new immigrants. So the thing is that's the system that can be preserved for people who have contributed to it and who deserve it. And reforming that is something that the left is going to lie about. Oh, he's cutting. No, not cutting Social Security. It's removing fraud from the Social Security system so that we have it going forward and in the future. So the people who paid into it will get it and should get every last cent anyway.
Well, the other thing
Yeah.
that was part of that was Medicare.
Oh, yeah.
Which
Well, yeah.
I would.
That's another thing, by the way, that we pay for.
Yeah, there are estimates that 1/3 of Medicare is fraud, and I believe it.
Oh, yeah.
Medicare was not a good idea, but I don't want to relitigate that right now. The point is, we have it, but they could save a lot of money by removing the fraud and corruption in it. And since healthcare amounts to, 17% of the gross national product, there's all kinds of waste in that.
Oh, yeah.
So you could do a lot. Just again, 80-20 rule. Go after cleaning up healthcare, and watch the money that you're saving.
I mean, they could literally take the amount of money that goes into Medicare, which you pay for. It's called FICA, F-I-C-A. It's on your paycheck. That's your money. And by removing all of the fraud and the graft, or as much as possible, you don't necessarily have to return that money to the taxpayer, although they should. You can reassign that money so that it actually does improve coverage or does help somebody who has expensive coverage. I mean, there are people who are denied coverage who really need it. People who's in some of these new medicines that and modalities that could cost like $500,000, but it means you're going to survive. We can do that if we get rid of the graft. We can pay for those things because we should. I mean, that's somebody's mother. We want to pay for that. Anyways, let's see what else do they have. Cancel the electric vehicle mandate and cut costly and burdensome regulations. That's been, we kind of talked about that with the batteries. That's a flop. I mean, well, they can continue to invest in it to eventually maybe find a means by which it's good, but to mandate that, what did they spend how many billions of dollars, and there's like 2 charging stations. I mean, the electric cars don't work that well in very hot or cold weather. I mean, there are problems with it. The technology is not quite there. You can't use mandates and then pay off your friends with the money that accrues from that.
Well, of course, the fallacy is that you're using a secondary source for the energy. The batteries still have to be charged, so there's no net savings in pollution. Not to mention the fact that you have to dispose of those batteries.
Yeah, they have the rare earth minerals.
Mm-hmm. It costs a young fortune to replace them. Right. It was unfortunately a typical greeny sort of wet dream, that very similar to low flow toilets. Yeah, right. On a given flush, it uses less water. The fact that you're going to have to flush it 3 times apparently is not part of the picture.
Or these light bulbs with the squiggle shape. That is more toxic than the old-fashioned Edison, incandescent bulb, which is actually very clean. But they said, well, we're going to save energy. Fine. I mean, I remember once we had one of those in my daughter's room, and it broke, and we had to leave the house. I mean, there was smoke coming out of the thing. Yeah. It was highly toxic. So I don't think that
a lot of mercury in them, and
and somebody got a big fat pay off of that one. I mean, some Democrat donor, right?
Yeah.
We know how that works.
In fairness, that technology disappeared after a few years because it wasn't really sustainable. They were dangerous. Exactly. They were environmentally bad. And when the LEDs came in, that was the solution. I mean, that's legit. But the compact fluorescent they were used commercially for years before it went into the consumer side. But again, they have a very poor record
Right.
of championing these things, and then they make these exceptions. Apparently, it was okay to have mercury in compact fluorescent bulbs because, on the balance, we're saving energy or whatever. By the same token, it's okay to kill millions of birds with wind turbines, but apparently, it's not okay to kill them by building other structures that may harm them. So
no, it's all. I mean, even like these liberal hosts in Boston the other day, they had on this guy he's like a seaman. He's an expert on whales, and he mentioned that whales, because of the wind turbines built on the water, it's confusing their radar, and they're basically beaching. They become
right.
disoriented, and the talk show host completely cut him off. They don't want to hear about that because
No,
you can't criticize wind turbines. It's like criticizing the vax. Let's not go there. We're on YouTube. All right. Anyway, let me move on. Let's see. Federal funding for any school pushing critical race theory, radical gender ideology, and other inappropriate racial, sexual, or political content on our children. Hallelujah. This is great. I think most Americans, including a lot of liberals, aren't too crazy with that kind of agenda.
no, but the fight is going to be, of course, these word games. Well, no, this really isn't critical race theory. It's blah blah blah, and you're just
racist for criticizing this.
Yeah.
But by teaching children that that their race means something, and that the other people are oppressing them, and that white people are, this kind of white people are devils. It's almost like
here it is. Where does this crap come from? It comes from tenured professors in these worthless academic institutions, which sadly seems to include even places like Harvard. So, if you're on a sinecure situation, you got to write something. So,
it's an agenda that came from the Frankfurt School of Social Research at Columbia. These social scientists, many of them German Jews, actually, came to this country in the 1930s.
Well, they weren't big Jews, to be fair.
The what?
They weren't really big Jews.
No, and there were plenty of non-Jews too. But I'm just saying, people like Theodor Adorno, Erich Fromm, Herbert Marcuse, they came and they devised this whole critical theory. They were Marxists, and it was basically a transfer of the Marxist theory of exploitation. The idea that if you have something more than your neighbor, you're ripping them off, and you have to distribute it equally.
I never saw Marcuse turn down a salary raise from the university.
Well, they basically, it works like allegedly the Catholic Church had the issue of emoluments, which is one of the things that Martin Luther brought up, and that it had become corrupted in that if you give X number of dollars, you'll go to heaven, but you can do the crime. I mean, I think that it's a guilt offering by these super successful, ultra rich types who will throw a few crumbs off the table for some left-wing group, and then they feel like they're absolved, so they can be capitalists. Anyway, to move on, keep men out of women's sports. Hallelujah. That's a simple one, right? Women are getting concussions. This is big, fat, greasy guy with a hairdo in women's wrestling? Really? You're gonna have your daughter go after him? Go up and against him?
Why do you think, though, that this is supported by many of the organized platforms?
That's a good question. And now I think one of them is going on the Olympics, by the way.
Yeah.
Who's behind that? And Riley Gaines talked about how the team, her swim team, was told that this guy was going to be on the team and that they were not to criticize it. Who made that decision? Where did that come from?
Well, here again, and I hate to keep using this punching bag, but this came out of academia. But the other thing is, Riley Gaines notwithstanding, how many other girls on those teams spoke up?
They were afraid to speak up because they would have been.
Right. But we've discussed this.
Yes.
What are they saving? Nobody cares about competitive swimming. There is no professional swimming circuit. So maybe you quit the team, go on with the rest of your life, and that's that.
Yeah, I know.
Because and anyway, all right, great. You won the NCAA. Maybe you'll be in the Olympics. But again, outside of Mark Spitz and Michael Phelps and Janet Evans, how many of these people could you even name?
Well, look, I mean, I don't know. First of all, I mean, I don't know if I entirely agree, because I think that women's sports is a great chance for young women to get the benefit of being athletes. It's healthy.
Until it gets perverted.
Well, that's the problem. I mean, it's a great chance to learn various skills that help you in life being an athlete. I mean, it's a it's a valuable thing. And whatever happened to Title IX? Women were supposed to get an equal share of sports resources that men got. Now, maybe you and I may not agree with that, but the fact is that now means nothing, because you're getting guys who are going in there like the Lee Thomas, a mediocre swimmer, so he ends up getting trophies because he puts on a wig and he says, "I'm a girl now." Anyway, moving on.
Right.
Deport pro-Hamas radicals and make our college campuses safe and patriotic again. I think it's now been shown, according to recent information, that much of that whole radical movement was funded by Iran, that Qatar is the largest financial supporter of American campuses, and that you can draw a correlation between the degree of their support and these neat little fancy tents that went up for supporting
the appeared, yes.
Yeah, they were supporting the lunatics who slaughtered 1,000 Israelis. Anyways, it's I think this is a very important issue. You've got North Koreans studying nuclear science at MIT. You've got Palestinians studying explosives. I mean, on campuses. They should be deported immediately. Immediately.
Well, let's not forget, and again, this will be the third time I mention it, look at the institution itself. Okay.
It's been corrupted by money coming in from Qatar and Iran. Harvard accepted this huge, I don't know, 300 million, not that they need the money, but this huge endowment that actually was turned down by several other colleges, including Georgetown. They didn't want to have it. Harvard accepted it. It's corruption. There's a lot of money in it. Secure our elections. Hallelujah. Including same-day voting, voter identification, paper ballots, and proof of citizenship. Now, if Trump does one thing, this is it. If he can do this.
Do people realize how huge this is? Seriously.
Yeah.
How did California, for example, my state, which was at one time when I was growing up, fairly equally divided between the more conservative South and the liberal North, suddenly, after Schwarzenegger, become 1,000% blue. All right.
Well, how did that happen, actually?
Massive fraud.
And plus registering illegal aliens to vote.
Well, that first started with your old friend B1 Bob.
Did he?
No. Bob Dornan.
Bob Dornan, yeah.
Was a Republican congressman for a number of terms.
Yeah, Orange County.
Mm-hmm. And he ended up running against a woman who called herself Loretta Sanchez, who discovered her Hispanic roots at the time of the.
Kamala Harris discovered that she was black when she was decided to get into politics.
So it was incontrovertibly true.
Yeah.
That there were hundreds, if not more, illegals that voted in that election. And Dornan lost, and Dornan complained, and the RNC didn't help him, and the Congress didn't help him, presumably because it might tick off illegal aliens or something. There was no particular reason given. and based on this faulty assumption
Right.
that apparently all Hispanics are liberal, which they're not, and all Hispanics apparently support illegals, which they don't. So that was the first one that I saw, and then it just went downhill from there. When you're watching the 2020 election in places like Detroit and Philadelphia, massive fraud on video, but of course that's not what you were seeing, right? So
right. Of course. And it's the only way they do get into power. Of course, you're right. I mean, it is massive fraud, and I mean, it goes way back. It actually goes back in American history. I mean, we've never had a clean. I mean, it goes back to Jefferson. I mean, with all due respect. I mean, but the problem is that, right? I mean, the problem is that when Kennedy won, and I love Kennedy, but nevertheless, I mean, it's there was some research done. I think about maybe 10 years ago, a team of journalists did a pretty deep dive into the Kennedy election, and they discovered irrefutable evidence that it had been stolen. But Nixon was kind of an insider guy. I mean, he was sort of, he knew how to wait his turn, so he didn't challenge it. And
that Eisenhower begged him to contest the election.
Really,
but he didn't. He was going to bide his time.
He bided his time, and he got a shot the next time and won. But the thing is that that's not who Trump is. Right. Trump doesn't play by those rules. That's one of the things that makes Trump unique. He was like, no, I'm not. He's different. I'm not going to sit down and take it.
He's not part of the boys' club, and the problem with Nixon was his fatal flaw was that he always wanted to be one of the cool kids.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And as much as I admire Nixon, and Nixon, of course, was the most. I mean, Roger Stone makes this point, and he does it well because he knew Nixon pretty well. He was the most popular president in American history in terms of the number of votes when he won his reelection. And yet, within a year, he was gone.
Yeah.
There was some shenanigans. We could talk about that. I might do some programs on that and how that was done. But they couldn't do it to Trump, even now. I mean, God willing, he's safe. But he just has disrupted the whole rotten, internationalist, illuminated establishment. He wasn't supposed to win. It was supposed to be a contest between Hillary Clinton and Jeb Bush, right? I mean, and all of a sudden Trump came up, and it wasn't supposed to happen. So they've tried everything. I mean, starting with immediately developing Jack Dorsey at Twitter developed the algorithm censorship, and then that graduated into outright censorship. And they did, and plus we know from I think that it's a worthwhile for any of our listeners to reread or to read Molly Ball's article in Time magazine, which came out in February of 2021, about how they stole the election. She lays it all out there. They love to brag. And they're going to try to do it again. I don't know. I mean, this time it's been such a bust with Biden, that I don't know if they'll,
What's going to happen with him? All right. Everybody's predicting that that's going to fall apart, and yet time marches on. We get close to the election. You've got Lady Macbeth in there behind him, convincing him he should stay in.
Yeah.
It's fun to watch, I have to admit.
I mean, I think that every day that goes by that Biden is still there is good, because Trump is going to beat him like an old drum. I mean, it's a complete bust. And apparently all of the alternatives that have been mentioned, including Al Gore, they do worse against Trump than Biden. Biden's actually the strongest one they have.
One poll has Kamala beating Trump.
None. I mean, it's a complete mess. Nobody supports her. She's and it's an embarrassment to the Democratic Party, because people in California have talked about the fact that she was always just passed through, just boosted because she did the bidding and because she claimed to be black and she was, she worked on that. And, she's never really done much. I mean, obviously not the brightest bulb in the chandelier. And it's become apparent. I don't think that she has any backing. And maybe they'll try to dump Biden. I think that's not going to work for them. And then they're going to try to boost her up. I just don't think it's going to work. Just like I don't know who made the decision to have Biden go out and do that debate. But now they're trying to blame Trump. Really? I mean, they challenged Trump, and I think they thought Trump wasn't going to do it.
Well, that's exactly right.
And then when Trump did it, they then put up all these conditions, and Trump agreed to every one of them.
Yeah.
And then he sat back. He was very measured, and he just let the whole country finally see what we've seen since day one, which is that
I just saw this, that apparently somebody got a hold of some paperwork that established that this was no secret from going years back. I mean, obviously it wasn't, but they knew about it.
Well, look, I mean, Mike, you and I were talking about it from day one, and so were most conservatives. Everybody knew what they were seeing. I mean, my late mother-in-law, who was an ultra-liberal leftist, she commented when Biden was running that he has dementia. She could tell by the way he was carrying himself.
Yeah.
And she never, she would vote for all liberals. I mean, everybody knew it in their gut. It was just obvious. But now you finally, and they obviously lied about it all these years, and the media covered it up all these years, and now they're getting stuck. It's out in the open. I mean, it can't be denied. They cannot. It's like H.R. Haldeman once said when he was asked by John Dean, "What should I do? I'm about to have to testify." And he reminded him, he said, "Once the toothpaste is out of the tube, you can't put it back." And that's what's happened here. It's all out. Everyone sees it. He's not playing with a full deck. And everything that was said about it was true. And they're stuck with him because, I mean, the Gateway Pundit just did an article where they noted that at some point in the next, I think it's 2 or 3 weeks, if Biden is still on the ballot, if he's removed from the ballot, then the Democratic Party will not have anyone on the ballot in several major states, including Ohio.
Yeah.
I mean, they can't, they're stuck with him. So that's, I mean, Trump, if I was Trump, if I were Trump, I would just go back to Mar-a-Lago and hire some extra security people, maybe put some machine guns out, build a turret around the place and just wait. It's over.
It's going to be very interesting to see how the media reacts to this over the ensuing few months, right? That I mean, who was it now? George Clooney
Oh my God.
came to him and said he's raised $30 million, but you have to get out. And
they really are going to do something because they're starving him out. I mean, you get the big money donors, the Disney heiress, Abigail Disney, Disney's niece. She's announced publicly no more money until Biden leaves. And she's telling all her friends no more money until Biden leaves. That's a death knell. I mean, they're going to starve him.
It's going to come from the donors, but then, let's talk about the next step. Okay, great. They have to get rid of him, but who do you put in?
They can't put anyone in. They have to recognize Kamala Harris, because if he's forced to get out of the race because he's got dementia, he's going to have to leave his office. You can't do both.
They're going to try to fight that and use the Edith Wilson defense, maybe. But
well, I mean, but the point is that if he is going to drop out, I mean, who do they have on the bench? None of them poll well against Trump. They all poll worse. He's actually the strongest one on their bench right now. Unless they come up with some, I don't know. I mean,
well, as as I put in my article, what if they come up with an effeminate African American unknown state senator from somewhere?
You mean, well, they did that already.
Yeah, right. That's right.
That's been done. I mean, I actually think that maybe their only chance is to nominate RFK. And he's said that he thinks they should. I mean, they've demonized him for being a nut, but that's really, I think that's really their only shot.
That's a good play. But RFK has made a few enemies, including within his own family.
Yeah, but they'd all get, if he's taken on Trump, they'll all, everything gets smoothed over within a matter of a minute. And, I mean, I think that, he's a liberal. I mean, he would, and yet he's interesting. He has some of the same populist energy that Trump has. Yeah. And I think that could be an interesting race, actually. I don't see them, there's really nothing else that would be valuable.
I don't know that they would ever think of doing that unless it came down to some last minute, desperate, smoke-filled room thing.
Well, I think they are having that now. They are desperate. The most recent poll shows that Trump is pulling even in New York.
Yes.
I mean, that's D-Day. I mean, that's like, the ship is going down with that. I mean, that's
the last time there was a conservative office holder in New York State. I can't remember.
No.
Going back 100 years.
When was the last time? Well, when was the last Republican to take well, actually Reagan did, but I mean, I'm just saying that New York has become, that's a bellwether left state.
Yeah.
I mean, to lose New York?
Well, even the Republicans in New York, were leftists. Jake Javits.
Fine, but the point is that if they lose, I mean, all of the battleground states, it looks like they're all gone now. Every one of them. Even Wisconsin, which was kind of on the edge.
Yeah.
New Hampshire is now polling for Trump. I mean, it's weird, they're in trouble. I can only imagine what must be going on in those rooms right now. I mean, it almost seems like it's inevitable.
The RFK thing seems like a good move.
It's the only thing I could think of that the only shot they have. I mean, Al Gore. I mean, I don't think so. Maybe they could bring back, I don't know, maybe Mitt Romney might switch parties, I suppose. But yuck. I don't know. I mean, who else?
I'm glad they have this dilemma. I mean, they certainly brought it on themselves.
They certainly did.
With all these decades of failed policies.
And something, he's going to bring down the whole, both houses with him. Already, the Republicans are in a pretty good position to at least hold on to the House. It looks like they could pick up upwards of 20 seats.
I've seen that.
Yeah. And in the Senate, technically, people don't realize this, but they are actually the Democrats have lost the majority in the Senate even now, because I think that Joe Manchin has announced that he's no longer a Democrat. So technically, they don't even have the Senate. And just one or two senators, and Trump will go into office with both houses. That would be freaking huge.
Well, of course, that happened. And unfortunately, he had Paul Rhino.
He had Paul Ryan, who turned out to be a complete snake and a traitor. He was behind the dossier. Did you hear about that?
I had heard that.
I mean, I think that they say that Ryan, this is according to Kash Patel, who was on the staff under Ryan, working as one of his investigators, who said, and I think he's right, that Ryan was sitting on that. He knew about it, covered it up. I mean, I don't know what the hell. What is the deal with people like that? What do they have? They have something against Trump? I mean, get Mona Charen. I mean,
these people are what we used to call lace curtain Republicans.
They are they insane? I mean, what the hell? I mean, is it? I mean, the only explanation I have, as you say, it's a snob thing.
Yes.
People like Bill Kristol and these kind of these they're aspiring to talk with a phony British accent. They want to be like on NPR, where they sound like it's like John Kerry. They talk like they have a mouthful of marbles. Whoa, 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 whoa. Is that really that important to them that they'd sell out the whole country? They claim to be conservative. Trump was a conservative president. He and his administration was pretty conservative. What the hell's the matter with like Mona Charen? For God's
There's
sake.
there's a tradition, and you can call it snobbery, but I think it's just that they're Republicans because they're fixated with this notion that the Democrats were the party of immigrants and these smelly working class types, and they wanted to distinguish themselves from those people. So you had guys like Rockefeller.
Right.
Of course, you can make the argument the first rhino was probably Teddy Roosevelt.
Possibly. I don't know about that, but he was the first sort of internationalist.
Well, he was an internationalist, but then he developed some sort of social conscience, which I don't think was genuine.
I think that came after he was out of office, and then he became the Bull
right,
Moose.
when he joined the Bull Moose Party, which of course was able to springboard your favorite Woodrow Wilson.
Yeah, and I think he was put up to that by people who knew how to massage his ego. Yeah. People say that as a person, he was almost like a kid.
Yeah.
He's like he didn't have much grounding. But the thing is that I actually think there might be a little more of a conspiratorial understanding of this. When you have people like, for example, Brad Raffensperger in Georgia, sitting on hundreds of thousands of uncounted ballots and knowing that the election was, because we have YouTube, I don't want to use the S word. And then he takes a call from Trump, and Trump's, can you find 10,000 votes? And he's taping it, and then he uses it.
Yeah.
People like that, and people like Robin Voss over in Wisconsin, another one who was, defying the state, the legislature, and implementing drop boxes where you have people being filmed stuffing the box. They are not really Republicans. I think that they were put up to it. They took a Republican ballot. They signed up as Republicans because they knew that in their state and in their district, they would only vote for Republicans.
Well, that's a classic riot in name only, but this tradition.
Yeah, but they actually are not in any way. There's nothing whatsoever about them that's Republican. There's a couple of them
other than they call themselves
trying to undermine the Bill Paxton, the Attorney General there. These people are Democrats who simply signed up as Republicans so that they could take office and then do the bidding of the destroying the Republican Party. It's that simple.
Well, that was the classic definition, right? In name only.
Yeah.
But
I see it as a little more sinister than that. They're not even, but they literally are not at all. In name only, you have somebody who maybe thinks they're Republicans. These people are never were. They are there to undermine the party and to take over the party. They've nothing to do with.
Let's be honest. Rockefeller, Jake Javits, how were they Republican in any way, shape, or form?
Yeah, right? No, they weren't. And I think
they were reacting against, and they hated the fact that Barry Goldwater, the conservative, became the nominee. They worked very hard against that.
Yeah, and they're working hard to stop Trump. I think that it started with Wendell Willkie. We talked about this last time.
Oh, boy.
His book, One World. He was put up to it. He was like, you get these little egomaniacs who are massaged, and then they're put in, and you suddenly get your big fat face on the news, and you start thinking you're important, and people calling you and want your opinions, and they're controlled. They're part of the opposition, and they're just put in there to do this. And I think that after Willkie and after FDR passed away, I think you had a whole group of these so-called Republicans with the death of Robert Taft, which, the John Birch Society says he was murdered. I don't know about that. But nevertheless, and I wouldn't doubt it, you had all of these kind of mugwump Republicans come up who really were there to undermine the Republican Party and
Oh,
create.
Wilkie was one of the worst because he signed on with FDR in the following term.
Right.
He was a total phony.
And so is Thomas Dewey.
Well, Dewey was, I don't think as bad, but he certainly was so conservative. Although he was an office holder in New York. But,
right. I mean, he was another one of these guys. I think he was an attorney general. He was a good crime fighter, but he didn't have much depth. I mean, he was kind of one of these, even Eisenhower. I mean, I love Eisenhower, but
Eisenhower could have gone with either party.
Yeah, exactly.
And there were people like Robert Welch.
I think he went overboard with that. That Eisenhower was a communist.
Well, if you look at his book, The Politician, which is pretty heavily documented, you're going to come up with, and I'll just raise it this way, because this is basically what Welch said, without necessarily accusing him, Eisenhower, of anything.
Right.
He raised the question, how would it have looked different if some guy really were controlled by the Russians? What would they have done differently?
Well, no, you know what? I read that book, The Politician, and I think that Robert Welch went overboard with that. I mean, he really stepped in it, and that's unfortunate. Because he basically said that Eisenhower was an unconscious dupe. I think Eisenhower was surrounded by a couple of people, including his brother, Milton Eisenhower, who were pretty communist. They were pretty far left, and I think that there were things going on that either he didn't know about, or he might have looked the other way. It's kind of like Oppenheimer, right? His wife was a communist. The communist all in his circle. He wasn't necessarily pro-communist, but he kind of, I think they figured out how to really, I don't think FDR was really a communist either, but he was surrounded by them. He had living in the White House right down the hall. You had Laughlin Curry, who was his chief legal counsel, who was a member of the Communist Party and who fled the country after Roosevelt died. Before the hearings, he was called to testify, and I think he basically spent the rest of his life in China.
Yeah.
You had real hardcore communists in the White House. Harry Hopkins, Virginius Frank Coe, Alger Hiss. I could give you a whole list. And I think that FDR was surrounded by these people. I think toward the end of his life, he had some.
His wife wasn't exactly conservative.
His wife was a communist. Oh, completely. Yeah. In fact, FDR's son-in-law, who divorced his daughter, was a Curtis Dahl. He wrote a book called My Exploited Father-in-Law, which I read, where he shows how FDR was basically surrounded and neutered by these people. Yeah. And he shows how Eleanor Roosevelt became a communist. She started out as a conservative, but she was managed and conditioned by this guy who would come into the White House and give her instructions. What was his name? I mean, he was like an American political operator. He wrote a book. I forget his name. I'll get that next time. But I mean, he goes into details about how she changed and how he watched her change and how he challenged this once and he was told to shut his damn mouth. And, Roosevelt was, being maybe disabled. He couldn't quite get around. He was really dependent on people around him. And I think that toward the end of his life, he realized that he'd been screwed. And he realized that Stalin had completely lied to him. And
I would like to believe that. I really would.
Well, no, there's correspondence. There was some between Roosevelt and Churchill, where Roosevelt's like, "We have been effed. This is crazy." And then all of a sudden, FDR dies. I'm not saying that something didn't happen there, but I mean, he was waking up in the final weeks of his life, and it was too late. Anyway,
I mean, I'd like to see. I mean, it's not that I don't believe you. I'd like to see that reference.
We should try to get Michael Flores on this show to talk about. He's a great historian of that period.
I'm going to really
I,
start pestering the guy.
I am
because
trying to reach him. I mean, I don't know. We'll see if we can get him on because he would be a great regular guest. He's got his hand on all of this World War II era history and how this happened, because it was really then that this internationalist left really started to take over and create what Eisenhower himself called the military industrial complex. Eisenhower also, in that famous speech where he spills the beans as he's leaving, right, the next day, he also referred to a media technology complex. People don't know that part of the speech, which is true. And Nixon talked about this, the media complex that has taken over, because the media is completely co-opted and they can lie. They don't have any accountability. They're not elected. They have total power. They can do whatever they want. It goes back in a way to Katharine Graham, who took over the Washington Post and who, rumor has it, had her husband murdered, and other kind of things where there was a real takeover in the media by the far left. Anyway, we're getting off subject, but
well, it is fascinating stuff.
it is. But
that would be,
yeah.
I never thought of that. I'll just have to say this to end it, that would make a lot of sense, because Roosevelt's early history, he was not really a big lefty. So where the hell?
I mean, when he ran against Hoover, Hoover was the lefty.
Yeah.
And when he got into office, the first thing he did was he cut all departments of government by 5%. He said, I don't care how you do it, you cut your government now. And, they did. I mean, he was like, he kind of reined everything in, and he was.
So what in the world happened? And there we are. They took advantage of the sick guy.
Yes. Well, basically, I think his condition was deteriorating at the end, and he had people around him who had big, big agendas. So, Mike, what do you have coming up on your Substack?
Well, I had the one on, that came out a few days ago about who was the biggest loser in the debates, and we've talked about that. And I suppose I'm going to have to go into this destruction of the institutions thing again. That, this is the point. We talked about this in various different ways. All the stuff that's happening because of academia, but then, people still go to college, and you have to. That people just can't seem to break away from these old understandings of institutions.
Right.
Some of them still watch the evening news, and so it's like, why? So how do they have this power? I mean,
well, it's custom. I mean, a part of it. Anyways, I just want to mention as a program note that I'm not going to be here next week. I'm going to be in New York. I'm going to be studying Talmud with my daughter.
Wow.
So I'm not going to be doing any of the show next week, but I shall return in 2 weeks.
Well, bring some excerpts. We can discuss.
Oh, I know. All right. So, Mike, listen, as always, thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure. Have a good time in New York.
Thank you. And I'll talk to you then.